The story begins with Lin Feng driving tiredly through the night city, frustrated at the empty shift and dreaming of sleep. Suddenly, Su Meng ran straight into the road, forcing him to brake sharply with a squeal of tires. She walked confidently to the car, knife in hand, and opened the door without hesitation. Lin Feng flared up, stating that it was dangerous, but fell silent when Su Meng clicked the lock. Looking at him coldly, she put the knife to his throat and ordered him to go to Zongluotan. Lin Feng ran the red light at full speed, feeling his heart pounding frantically in his chest. Su Meng stretched out her hand and demanded to hand over her phone, but Lin Feng only chuckled, saying that his cell phone had long been broken and useless. Getting angry, Su Meng yelled out that her phone was low on battery and therefore he had better not argue. She quickly dialed a number and introduced herself as Lume, a schoolgirl being held in Zongluotan's old factory building. Lin Feng questioned in horror, asking if he had correctly understood that he had been robbed just for the sake of going there. Su Meng said that Lin Feng already knows too much about her, so he should come to her school tomorrow, where she would make up for the inconvenience caused. Lin Feng grinned and replied that since it was a matter of saving people, one couldn't put it off, and helping beauties was holy in general. He pressed the gas pedal sharply, and the car took off, racing toward the target at high speed. Upon arriving, Lin Feng nonchalantly replied that it wasn't a problem for him and watched as Su Meng rushed forward. Before leaving, Su Meng reminded him to remember to come back tomorrow, because she didn't have time to wait. Lin Feng wondered if it was really normal to send a girl alone to such a dangerous place. Suddenly, a woman approached him and coquettishly offered him a taste of seafood, but he refused, saying he couldn't stand the smell of it. She smiled and advised him to come back tomorrow to try something fresh then, but Lin Feng realized that it was only a hint. Meanwhile, Su Meng had already burst into the abandoned building, loudly calling out to Wei Wei and looking around for her friend. A sharp sound made her freeze. There was a bound girl sitting in front, and someone in the shadows next to her. Su Meng ran up to Wei Wei in relief, happy that she had finally found her, and immediately promised to release her. But barely had she taken a step when a mocking voice was heard nearby, noting that her boldness was commendable but foolish. Several people came out of the darkness, and one of them grinningly stated that now that Su Meng was here, it was too late to leave. Suddenly she realized it all. This was a trap, and now she would have to fight to get out. One of the bandits laughed, noticing that she seemed to know how to fight, and rushed to attack with gusto. Suddenly there was a metallic sound in the silence. Something hard hit the wall 3 times, causing everyone to freeze. The bandits turned around sharply, their faces contorted with surprise. They clearly hadn't expected such a turn. Lin Feng calmly stepped forward, holding a cigarette in his hand, and said with a nonchalant look that he was simply returning the item left in his car. Su Meng exclaimed in shock, asking why he had come here since it was too dangerous, and ordered him to leave immediately. However, one of the bandits grinned evilly, announcing that there was another fool who had decided to play with death. One of the bandits swung the bat with fury, bringing down a blow directly on Lin Feng with a shout. But Lin Feng deftly dodged, and the weapon slammed into the floor with force, leaving a deep dent. The bandits looked around in confusion, trying to figure out where he had disappeared to, until someone shouted, pointing upwards. Lin Feng sat nonchalantly on top of the container, lazily asking if he was the one they were looking for. Before they could react, he flipped spectacularly in the air, avoiding impact, eliciting cheers of admiration. After the trick, Lin Feng swayed slightly, admitting to himself that he hadn't done such a thing in a long time and now felt slightly dizzy. A bandit named Deboa stepped forward, demanding to know which faction he belonged to and why he was meddling in other people's affairs. Lin Feng calmly reminded that he was just a cab driver who had come to return the passengers' forgotten belongings. Su Meng looked at him in disbelief, amazed that he continued to joke even in such a dangerous situation. Deboa frowned and loudly ordered his men to stop talking and attack at once. The bandits rushed forward with loud shouts, swinging their bats and weapons, intending to finish Lin Feng off. But he only lazily turned to Su Meng and reminded her with a smile that she would have to treat him to a late-night snack after this fight. In the next instant, Lin Feng lightning quickly jumped down, deftly dodging attacks and delivering precise strikes at his opponents. One of the bandits howled in pain and collapsed to the floor, while the others recoiled in panic, realizing who they had messed with. Lin Feng sighed irritably as he looked around at the remaining enemies and stated that they were too noisy. Lin Feng effortlessly swept the bandits around, sending them knocking them out one after another. He calmly straightened up, twirled the knife in his fingers, and announced that the job was over. Su Meng watched him in amazement, unable to believe that an ordinary cab driver could be so strong. The enraged Deboa scornfully threw that he didn't need any more weaklings and went for his weapon. In the next second, he grabbed Su Meng by the throat, mockingly offering to test who would be faster, her knife or his bullets. Lin Feng only grinned, looking at Deboa with a mocking expression as if anticipating his next move. He calmly offered to test who would be faster, his reflexes or the bullet from the gun. Deboa shouted with rage, calling him an insolent man, and without thinking he pulled the trigger. Su Meng cried out in fear, realizing that she wouldn't be able to do anything in time to stop the shot. But before the bullet reached its target, Lin Feng dashed forward lightning fast, carrying it away. The knife flew forward with a whoosh, flashing through the air and heading straight for the target. Deboa cried out in pain as the blade slid into his arm, causing him to drop his weapon. Lin Feng remarked with a slight chuckle that he seemed to have lost, no matter how obvious it was. Deboa faltered, clutching his wounded arm tightly, and screamed in rage, unable to believe he was in this position. His face contorted with anger, he gritted his teeth and violently let out a curse, unable to accept defeat. Lin Feng swung his foot sharply, sending a strange object straight at Deboa's head. There was a pop and the opponent collapsed backwards, flailing his arms ridiculously before falling. Su Meng stared in amazement at what was happening, unable to believe that an ordinary cab driver could pull off such a thing. In her imagination, Lin Feng turned into a shining knight who had descended from the heavens to save her. Meanwhile, he stood back, smugly raised his hand, and admitted aloud that he really was pretty damn good. The handcuffs snapped on the bandits' wrists with a clang, rendering them completely unable to resist. The armed forces stormed the building, loudly ordering everyone to stay where they were and not to move. Wei Wei's father called out to her in a panic, and her mother tearfully begged her to tell her where their daughter was. The girl rushed to her parents, excitedly exclaiming that she was okay, and hugged them tightly. The father cradled his daughter in relief, comforting her while the mother couldn't hold back tears of joy. The soldiers began to lead the hostages to safety, ordering the other detainees not to resist. Lin Feng was outraged, stating that they had arrested the wrong person. After all, he was just a hero coming to the rescue. The officer confidently ordered everyone to leave the room, adding that he would interrogate the detainee himself. The subordinates responded with a short "Aye, sir," and hurried to carry out the order without further question. Off to the side, the fighters were smirkingly discussing that the captain was known for being tough and debating how long Lin Feng would last. The captain silently looked at Lin Feng, sizing him up with an impenetrable expression. Then a smirk flashed across his lips, as if he found the situation amusing. One of the fighters cheerfully called out to him, offering him a cigarette and praising him for successfully completing the operation. The captain grinned, saying he just decided to stretch out a bit since he had some free time. Lin Feng carelessly threw something in his direction and calmly stated that he no longer wanted to be called boss. Night shrouded the city, and the thin sickle of the moon shimmered above the shining skyscrapers. An enrollment notice lay on the table, with 2 upturned photo frames next to it. Lin Feng walked out of the bathroom, wiping his hair with a towel, and stopped while looking at the document. He picked up one of the frames, gazing thoughtfully at the reflection as if remembering something important. His gaze became resolute. He had already entered Zijing High School, and now he would fulfill his promise. At Zijing High School, they announced a new student in the 7th grade, encouraging everyone to give him a warm welcome. Lin Feng indifferently introduced himself, causing disappointment in some and admiration in others. The girls were talking excitedly, arguing over who liked him better, while the guys were looking at him irritably. Wei Wei and Su Meng were surprised to recognize him, not expecting to meet him at school again. Meanwhile, the 2 bullies grinned evilly, planning to taunt him and shake him out of his money. One of the bullies smirked as he called out to his friend, pointing at Lin Feng, clearly planning something unpleasant. He stretched out his leg, about to step up and make the new student embarrass himself in front of the whole class. But Lin Feng lightningly stepped on his foot, pinning it to the floor with a force that made him barely hold back a scream. The bully groaned in pain, his face contorted, but he couldn't move, wedged between the desk and the heavy boot. The teacher turned around, asking what was going on, but the other students quickly replied that nothing was wrong. One of the disciples turned to Lin Feng with admiration, noting that he had the audacity to hurt Liao Chenkuan. Another disciple explained that Liao Chenkuan himself wasn't that important, but there was an influential faction behind him, making money from the extortion. Lin Feng thoughtfully noted that since they were collecting so much money, it meant that they must have quite a bit of wealth. The interlocutor nervously nodded in agreement, but immediately asked what exactly Lin Feng was up to. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and Lin Feng relaxed on his desk, enjoying the moment. There was a thud. Someone kicked Lin Feng's desk with force, interrupting his calmness. The 2 bullies smugly said that the school had its own rules and newcomers had to pay 2,000 yuan for protection. The other students watched on, whispering with interest that everything was going as expected and the new guy was already in jeopardy. One of the disciples was indignant, noticing that the fee was usually only 1,000, and asked why Lin Feng was being charged twice as much. The bully gloatingly explained that the man had stepped on his foot, and therefore was now obliged to pay for his treatment. Wei Wei resolutely intervened, looking at Liao Chenkuan with disdain and asking why he was bullying his classmates. The disciples whispered in surprise, not understanding why she stood up for the newcomer. After all, even she couldn't control Tian Meng's gang. One of the disciples explained that the Wei Wei family was too influential, and if Liao Chenkuan hoped for the support of his gang, he was greatly overestimating his strength. Lin Feng lazily flipped through his textbook and said with a sigh that he would rather do his studies than get involved with this silly squabble. The bullies laughed, claiming he had taken something wrong, and promised to show what they could do. Lin Feng calmly closed his textbook, ignoring the approaching bullies. In the next second, he hit them with the book with force, sending two of them to the floor at once with the words that knowledge is power. The students watched in shock, some admiring his courage, others certain that he was now in trouble. Lin Feng grinned and said that since he had set an example, he should be the one to charge the security money now. Then he leaned back in his chair, noting with a smirk that the bullies would probably run to complain to their ringleader. Lin Feng smiled sinisterly and ordered him to tell him that after class, the gang leader should personally give him all the money he had collected. The frightened ruffians hastily nodded, agreeing without objection, not daring to argue with his threat. The students discussed what was happening in shock, amazed that the newcomer was now demanding security money from the gang himself. One of them incredulously wondered if Lin Feng was seriously saying this, but still recognized that he was incredibly cool. Su Meng and Wei Wei looked at each other with a smile, realizing that he clearly didn't need their help. The teacher sternly called out to the students, demanding that they explain what they were doing there instead of being in class. She reminded them that the bell had already rung and looked intently at the bullies, waiting for their reaction. They clenched their fists unhappily, but took the opportunity to throw Lin Feng a warning and reluctantly dispersed. Lin Feng only stared at them silently, not reacting in any way to their threats and remaining unperturbed. The teacher introduced herself as Ms. Lin Lanqian and announced that the lesson would begin with the repetition of English prepositions. Lin Feng yawned, thinking to himself that English class was incredibly boring and completely uninteresting. The teacher, leafing through a book, posed a question to the class, calling for someone to answer, but no one was in a hurry to respond. The students lowered their heads, internally begging not to be chosen, and some hoped to hide by simply avoiding the teacher's gaze. Meanwhile, Lin Feng didn't bother pretending at all. He simply fell asleep right at the desk without hiding his indifference. The whole class soon heard him snoring softly, and he himself sat up, falling deeply into slumber. The students whispered amongst themselves, amazed at how Lin Feng dared to sleep in the class of the strictest teacher. One of the bullies grinned, realizing that he didn't even need to interfere. The teacher would teach the newcomer a lesson herself. She walked up to Lin Feng and sharply asked to let him sleep in the classroom while bringing the book in for a punch. With a loud pop, the book dropped onto the table, but Lin Feng managed to dodge it without even opening his eyes. The teacher froze for a moment, realizing she had missed, while the students watched in amazement. Lin Feng continued to slumber serenely, easily dodging the blows as if he was doing it on automatic. The disciples watched him in utter shock, amazed at how he confidently dodged attacks even in his sleep. Su Meng and Wei Wei couldn't believe their eyes, realizing that he was just bullying the teacher. Angry, she clenched her fists and decided that since she couldn't hit with a book, she would use force then. She swung her foot, intending to knock him off balance, but at that moment something unexpected happened. The teacher shrieked and jerked back, clearly not expecting things to turn against her. Lin Feng opened one eye, looked at her in surprise, and innocently asked if everything was alright. She squinted, thinking he was just faking it, and reminded him with irritation that sleeping in class was not acceptable. The students held their breath, realizing that if he didn't answer correctly, he was in for a rough ride. Lin Feng quietly apologized, citing fatigue, but the teacher sternly stated that next time, he would listen to the lesson outside. Lin Feng abruptly stood up and indignantly asked if the teacher was sending him to study at the widow's house. She instantly erupted in anger, realizing that he was purposely playing on the similarity of the pronunciation of the words. Several minutes had passed, and now the teacher was breathing heavily, realizing that she had completely lost the argument. She was shocked by his perfect English pronunciation, which even she herself found difficult to repeat. Embarrassed, she waved her hand, saying that she forgave him this time, but he needed to organize his time better in the future. The students were talking amongst themselves, puzzled as to how Lin Feng was able to emerge victorious so easily, even against the teacher. He only grinned lazily, reflecting that after years of military assignments overseas, English was child's play to him. The teacher turned away unhappily, determined that if she found a single mistake in his behavior, she would definitely teach him a lesson. One of the bullies was outraged, saying that it was unfair, because the teacher should have punished him for such an offense. But she interrupted him abruptly, angrily asking who gave him the right to tell her how to teach the lesson. A loud bell rang through the school, announcing the end of classes and the long-awaited start of recess. Against the brightening sky, there was a joyful shout of students rushing to leave their classrooms and enjoy their free time. A crowd of students quickly filled the hallways, footsteps echoing across the floor, creating a noisy atmosphere. But soon the tension rose. Tian Meng's gang was approaching down the corridor, and someone shouted anxiously that Lin Feng had better run. One of the disciples swallowed nervously and decided to be the first to escape, while Lin Feng only calmly pondered the situation. One of the students tried to run away, but he was immediately grabbed, shouting accusations of betrayal. The gang leader appeared in front of Lin Feng, smirking and mockingly asking if he was the newcomer who had challenged Tian Meng. Lin Feng snorted and laughed, saying that he had expected to see a tall and formidable leader, not such a short man. The ringleader's face contorted with anger, his eyes flashed with threat, and he viciously promised that Lin Feng was finished. However, Lin Feng only waved his hand lazily, saying that he didn't mind sorting things out, but they should let his classmate go first. The gang leader angrily ordered Tang not to let go, accusing him of helping Lin Feng earlier. Tan fearfully begged for mercy, but the bullies laughed, preparing to humiliate him and show their strength. Suddenly, however, the ringleader cried out in pain, his face contorted in fear as something went wrong. Lin Feng mockingly grabbed his face and politely asked him to repeat what he had said, pretending that he hadn't heard. Tanya was offered the chance, for this was the man who had bullied him, but he only pointed at himself in exasperation. Lin Feng looked straight into Tang's eyes and asked if he finally wanted to live with dignity or preferred to remain a coward. Tang froze, fear and determination struggling inside him, while memories of past humiliations flashed before his eyes. Finally, clenching his fists, he shouted that he no longer wanted to be a coward and let others bully him. With a loud battle cry, he pounced on his tormentor, unleashing a series of blows upon him, screaming that this was payback for everything. The surrounding students watched in shock, their eyes widened and their jaws literally dropped in surprise. Tang, encouraged by the victory, enthusiastically declared that henceforth he considered Lin Feng as his boss and would follow him everywhere. Lin Feng grinned, reminding him that the real goal was to punish the gang leader, not to organize a fan club. He approached Tian Meng's leader and reminded him that he had to give all the money he had collected after class. The frightened bandits frantically pulled out money, calling Lin Feng crazy and begging him not to use force. Lin Feng told Tang to return all the stolen items to the disciples, saying that he would deal with the ringleader himself from here on out. Lin Feng nodded thoughtfully and said that he couldn't just let the gang leader go, after all, he might hold a grudge. With those words, he grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and easily pushed him right out the window, eliciting a panicked scream. A slight chuckle flashed across Lin Feng's face as he coldly remarked that he would rather go straight to hell. Panic instantly spread through the school as students ran away screaming, thinking that Lin Feng had committed murder. Tang nervously offered to take charge, but Lin Feng grinned and assured him that he was still alive. Tang darted his eyes around stunned, not believing what was happening, and exclaimed confusedly. The gang leader ended up in a dumpster with a loud groan, shuddering at the stinking odor. Somewhere else, someone's dark aura awakened, as if reacting to the events that had unfolded in the school. Lin Feng stood calmly at the school gate as if nothing had happened, looking around the surroundings. Noticing something unusual, he squinted his eyes, gazing intently into the distance, trying to make sense of the situation. Near the school gate, two men in strict suits approached Lin Feng, inviting him to get into the car. They opened the door, insisting that their boss wanted to thank him personally for his recent act. Without showing much emotion, Lin Feng calmly got into the car, which immediately started moving. Inside he was met by a powerful man, scrutinizing the young man and wondering if he knew who he was talking to. But before getting down to business, the man preferred to first listen to what Lin Feng himself had to say. The man gloomily looked at Lin Feng, hinting that their conversation was about his intentions for his daughter. Lin Feng calmly replied that based on the words of his interlocutor, the latter seemed to suspect him of something. The interlocutor noticed that it was Lin Feng who had saved his daughter, and then he suddenly became her classmate. Lin Feng, grinning, offered to accept him into the family, and just share a couple billion in return. The man frowned sharply, making it clear he wasn't joking and was expecting a serious explanation. Lin Feng calmly stated that he wasn't going to admit something he didn't do, after all, he wasn't a fool. The man clenched his fists and warned him that the jokes were over and he had no intention of tolerating insolence. Suddenly, the guard loudly ordered me to step aside and the car began to bustle. Someone shouted, calling the boss, while another demanded in anger an explanation of what was going on here. The next instant a powerful blow smashed the door and the two flew outside, smashing through the glass. A deafening explosion lit up the street, flames shooting up into the sky, causing people to instinctively cover themselves with their hands. The view from above was eerie, with thick black smoke rising into the air and debris flying in all directions. Frightened people shouted in panic about the explosion. Someone demanded an ambulance urgently. The bodyguards rushed to their boss, asking if he was okay, but he only briefly replied that he was fine. The serious-looking man stared at Luofeng, asking if he thought it was a coincidence or accusing him of being involved. The man sighed heavily, realizing that the people behind the assassination attempt were people connected to his daughter's kidnapping. Luofeng calmly turned away, suggesting that his interlocutor deal with the situation and go investigate the explosion. The enraged head of the family ordered increased security for his daughter and vowed to personally deal with the culprits. However, he first demanded to be taken to the hospital, complaining that he had broken his ribs from the blow. Meanwhile, in the evening light of the busy market, Luofeng was enjoying a quiet meal amidst the bustle. Luofeng looked at the receipt with dissatisfaction, noting that even street food had become too expensive. The saleswoman asked him with a smile what he wanted to order, and he chose simple egg noodles. Sighing, he thought about the fact that his paycheck was barely enough to pay his tuition and there was barely any left for food. He ate quietly in the night silence of the bustling marketplace, contemplating the need to find a new place to live. But suddenly someone's indignant voice interrupted his thoughts. There was a cockroach in the soup. The clerk tried to apologize, claiming that the cockroach in the soup was just an accident, and offered to pay for dinner. The man opposite erupted in anger, accusing her of lying and demanding 20,000 yuan in compensation. Folding his hands on the table, he hinted that the amount could be discussed if she agreed to the terms. His smirk grew wider and wider as he offered another option, spending the night with them for 10,000 yuan. But the sales clerk became furious, shouting that they had set her up and threatened to call the police. Suddenly a wand whistled through the air, hitting one of the men, causing him to shout a rude remark. It turned out to be members of the Black Fox gang, and one of them brazenly asserted his superiority. Passers-by whispered in fear, realizing that the shopkeeper was in big trouble. The man with a wicked smile offered to settle the conflict if she would just agree to pay. But suddenly a bowl was placed in front of him, offering to prove him right in a most unexpected way. One of the thugs noticed the guy at the table and mockingly asked if he wanted to intervene. Lu Feng only smiled coldly, suggesting a more honest way to prove a point, through vomiting. The intruder became enraged and, wanting to show his strength, declared that he didn't care what he had. Suddenly, a rock flew into his face, hitting him with such force that his cheek instantly turned red. Lu Feng left him no choice and, moving with lightning speed, he attacked, showing who was in charge here. The man is on his knees, shaking convulsively, and suddenly he is wrenched to the ground as if he can't help himself. The person next to me looks down contemptuously and mockingly asks to examine the vomit more closely, hinting at possible cockroaches. The crowd is stunned. This guy actually dared to challenge the Black Fox gang, and his strength is shocking. An angry bandit with a face contorted with rage rushes forward, shouting threats of imminent retribution. Suddenly, a glass bottle falls to the ground at someone's feet, making those around them wary. The bandit cries out in pain as he is suddenly kicked, causing him to stagger and lose his balance. As he falls to the ground, he lets out a strangled groan, and the shards of a broken bottle fly nearby. The man standing above him coldly remarks that his friend has now joined the search as well, offering to enjoy the moment together. The audience watches with shock, amazed at the ruthlessness of this guy and the brutality of his methods. There is a stunned silence in the crowd. People only stare in silence, not knowing how to react. The bandits run away in panic. One of them shouts a threat and then complains that he's going to throw up. Satsuki looks at Hayato gratefully and says she doesn't even know how to thank him. She happily holds out the money and promises to treat him to a nice dinner, advising him to buy himself a nice meal. Hayato embarrassedly replies that he doesn't do good deeds for the sake of reward, otherwise he wouldn't be any different from criminals. Satsuki laughs, agreeing not to discuss money, while Hayato mentally calls himself a hypocrite. Hayato notices a rental ad, and Satsuki immediately asks if he's looking for a room. She explains that the girl recently moved out, so he can temporarily stay in the spare room. Satsuki adds that her husband handles the payroll, but he's on the night shift, and introduces himself as Lon. Lon leaves for work, saying that Hayato, who called himself Lo Feng, can call her if necessary. Lying on the bed, Hayato ponders the fact that it's a comfortable place and the smell confirms that girls lived here. Hayato glances at his stained shirt and decides to shower first, disgusted. He removes his outer garments, tossing them carelessly aside, and sighs, anticipating the refreshing water. A hand turns the faucet and water begins to pour with a splash, filling the room with a quiet noise. At this time, bright lights flash on the street next to a parked car, illuminating the sidewalk. The girl leaning on the car sighs tiredly, admitting to herself that she is completely exhausted. The girl walks up the stairs, irritated at the thought of never going to a boring banquet again. She reaches for the door and opens it without a second thought, clearly used to the place. Sighing with fatigue, she unzips her clothes, noticing unhappily that she smells like cigarettes. My hand turns the doorknob, there is a creak, and the bathroom door slowly begins to open. The next second, she freezes in amazement as she collides her gaze with Hayato, who is standing under the shower. Hayato stares at the girl in amazement, and she opens her eyes in shock, instantly blushing in surprise. He, not the least bit embarrassed, smiles amiably and wishes Ms. June a good evening, as if nothing strange had happened. The girl explodes with rage, screaming that she doesn't care about his politeness and demands an explanation. On the phone, Lon frantically apologizes, explaining that her husband misreported the information and promises to come over immediately. Later, sitting next to him on the couch, Hayato coughs into his fist while the girl looks away, tensely flipping through her tablet. Hayato calmly apologizes to Miss June, saying he can just leave since he hasn't even brought his things yet. With her head down, she tensely thinks, and then firmly decides that she will not tell anyone what happened. Hayato dramatically exclaims that he knew she wouldn't leave him on the street overnight, begging for shelter. June, blazing with rage, agrees, but demands absolute silence, vowing never to forgive what she has seen. Later, the conversation changes. She clarifies whether he really wants her to win the English speech contest and gets an affirmative answer. Hayato suggests with a smile that a condition of staying might be a daily massage, but June indignantly cuts off that he can't expect that. She sternly states that for the sake of secrecy, they will have to pretend like they have been living together for a long time. Lon asks in surprise if they're really cousins, and Hayato confirms the coincidence with a slight chuckle. Satsuki laughs in relief, saying she was so embarrassed, but now knowing the truth, she feels better. Lon offers to invite them over for dinner as an apology, and Satsuki happily agrees to cook a delicious meal. Hayato unashamedly declares that he's not going to pass up the chance for a free dinner, since there's no need to pay. June looks at him irritably, mentally condemning him for his shamelessness and greed, while he quietly wishes her a good night. Elsewhere, a young man wrapped in a blanket cries out resentfully that he has never been subjected to such humiliation in his life. Another man stands next to him with rage in his eyes, outraged that some new student dared to humiliate his brother like that. The next day, the sun illuminates the spacious school grounds where new events will soon unfold. One girl hesitantly tells her friend that she should just walk over and ask instead of hesitating. Satsuki tensely stares forward, mentally resenting why she has to do this when the other person can ask herself. Her friend teases her, asking if she's in love since she's so nervous, and adds that the fear of being rejected looks suspicious. Satsuki sharply rejects the idea, but eventually gives up and decides to handle it on her own. She approaches Hayato, inviting him to her birthday party next week, and he agrees without hesitation. Hayato smiles calmly and confirms that he will definitely come to the party, thanking him for the invitation. The girl cheerfully informs him that her father also wants to thank him in person, clearly feeling excitement. In class, someone irritatedly remarks that the prettiest girl in school asked Hayato out, and he himself is jealous. Another student derisively calls Hayato a big-headed guy, and says that the dean has been waiting for him for a long time. Hayato walks into the office and doesn't hesitate to ask if Dean Huang was really looking for him. Dean Huang looks at Hayato carefully and clarifies if he is indeed the same Luo Feng. Nearby, a student named Tan is goofing around, waving his arms, and someone mockingly asks why he's acting like a monkey. The dean abruptly interrupts the situation, raising his voice and demanding Hayato answer his question. Hayato calmly confirms his name and suddenly asks the dean if he had time for breakfast. Huang irritably reports that the school is taking disciplinary action, forcing both of them to write an essay and apologize. Hayato is surprised to notice that Dean Huang and Huang Tianai have the same last name, and asks if they are related. The dean cries out in rage, accusing Hayato of attempted murder, since he dumped his nephew in a garbage can. He adds that only Zhang Haitian's intervention saved Hayato from prison, but the latter only shrugs indifferently. Hayato calmly says that if Tan or anyone else has a problem, let them go to his uncle. Later, Tan admirably observes that Hayato was right, for the dean does indeed use the power because of personal revenge. Tan admits with annoyance that he hates the Huang family, but their power prevents him from doing anything about it. Hayato curiously asks who is more powerful after all, the Huang family or Zhang Haitian, to which he gets a confident answer. He smiles contentedly without saying anything, clearly pleased with what he's heard. Meanwhile, someone resents that Hayato and Tan got off so lightly despite their conflict with the dean. The school day comes to an end, and a loud bell announces to everyone that classes are over. Tan smilingly invites Hayato to dinner, bragging about his cooking skills, and then inquires about his new place to live. Before Hayato can respond, someone taunts loudly, calling them pathetic tramps, clearly intending to humiliate them. Ma Jian appears in front of them and is introduced as one of the best fighters of Huang Tao's gang, promising that this is the end of them. Fane calls out their names with shock, not understanding why exactly these two had come, clearly sensing danger. With rage in his eyes, he explains that Huang Tao and his father were involved in his mother's death and mutilated his father. Ma Jian states with a wild grin that Tang's parents got what they deserved, because they didn't realize who they were messing with. Tang clenched his teeth in rage as Ma Jian continued to laugh hysterically, enjoying his cruelty. Suddenly, Hayato lightly places a hand on Tan's shoulder, catching his attention and as if trying to calm him down. He calmly looks at Ma Jian and the others, asking what exactly they want and advising them to stop teasing people. Ma Jian warns with a wide grin that real payback awaits Tang today, and promises to send him to a wheelchair. Hayato grabs Ma Jian by the collar and lifts him up, demanding him to repeat what he said while he squirms in pain. The crowd watching cries out as they notice Hayato choking his opponent again, and the other bandits call for everyone to attack together. One of them swings his baton, shouting for Hayato to let Ma Jian go immediately, but the attack proves futile. In the next second, Hayato sends Ma Jian flying with one punch, causing him to collide painfully with his partner. Without giving his opponents a second thought, Hayato delivers a powerful blow to another of his attackers, causing him to collapse. One of the opponents flies backwards with a loud scream, falling helplessly to the ground after being hit. Ma Jian frowns as he looks at Hayato and calls him an insolent man with irritation, clearly preparing for a fight. He abruptly orders his men to retreat, declaring that none of them are capable of defeating Hayato. Speeding up, Ma Jian announces with a cocky smile that his fist is the fastest and promises to show the greatest punch. Tan, realizing the danger, shouts out a warning in panic, begging Hayato to be careful. Ma Jian strikes with force, but Hayato effortlessly stops his fist without even blinking. In the next second, Ma Jian swiftly flew backwards, his body twisting uncontrollably in the air. The crowd watches in shock as Thane's stunned and shouts out the name of his defeated opponent. Hayato remarks with a smirk that Ma Jian unfortunately doesn't have the greatest abilities as he boasted. The audience trembles with fear as they imagine Hayato in his sinister form, realizing that they don't stand a chance against him. The crowd looks at Hayato in horror, imagining him in demonic form, realizing that they don't stand a chance. Ma Jian is squirming on the ground, struggling to breathe, but a pained smirk plays on his face. Hayato arrogantly looks down and mockingly asks if there aren't any decent fighters in the Black Fox gang. Suddenly, one of the opponents snatches up a knife, holding it in a tightly bandaged hand. Ma Jian rushes forward with fury, promising to make Hayato bleed to death, drawing his weapon to strike. Hayato headbutts with force, shouting the name of his technique, and the opponent flies backward, grimacing in pain. In the same instant, he deftly intercepts the knife snatched from his attacker, showing incredible speed and control. With a slight sneer, he rebukes Ma Jian for his ineptitude with weapons and advises him to practice for a few more years. Ma Jian squirmed in pain, gritting his teeth as his own weapon was turned against him. The surrounding people watch in horror, and one of the bandits calls out to Ma Jian with a shout, shocked by his defeat. Ma Jian falls to the ground with a scream, his body trembling and his eyes reading fear and rage. Hayato coldly declares that he doesn't care what gang his opponents are from, but they better not get in his face again. The bandits grab Ma Jian in a panic, hurriedly carrying him away while the others hurriedly scatter. Tan notes with admiration that Hayato is incredible, but now he's crossed paths with two dangerous factions at once. Hayato puts a hand on his shoulder, reminding him of the dinner invitation, and Tan hastily replies that he wasn't going to refuse. Hayato walks down a narrow alley lit by warm light, noticing old houses with traditional architecture. He looks around with interest, surprised that houses like this are still standing, and notes the slight odor of alcohol in the air. Tan invites him to sit down, but Hayato notices a man on the couch with bottles scattered around him. Tan gently covers him with a blanket and explains that this is his father, who drinks every day but keeps the house in order. Hayato shifts his gaze to the photograph standing next to him, silently scrutinizing the image with slight tension. Hayato asks in surprise if Tan's father was a veterinarian, but the man bitterly replies that he's now just an invalid and an alcoholic. He looks at Tan seriously and asks for more about his family's feud with the Wands, clearly interested. Tan points to the ruined site and explains that their families once lived there until a developer bought up the land. Hayato clarifies if his mother died then, and Tan confirms with fury that she was one of the victims of that night. Tears come to Tan's eyes when he tells him that his father's legs were broken and the one family just paid him off. Tan's father is surprised to notice that his son has brought guests, but his voice sounds tired and indifferent. Hayato wordlessly asks Tan to go get a beer so he can have a drink with his father, and he agrees. Left alone, he introduces himself and explains that he came here for a reason, but he's not telling the truth. Tana's father stares silently at the empty chair, as if deep in thought, while a light breeze ruffles the clothes left on it. Then he covers his face with his hand and laughs bitterly, declaring that he is only a feeble old man, unable to compete with the young. Tan's father settles tiredly on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and promises to have a drink later when he's rested. Hayato looks at him carefully and asks defiantly how a former soldier of an elite unit could be so low. Those words hit him, he raises his head sharply, and something akin to a forgotten sense of honor flashes in his eyes. After a moment, he rises decisively and agrees to give Hayato a little training. Clenching his fist, he attacks with excitement, and Hayato easily accepts the challenge, preparing for the fight. Tan, back with the shopping, looks at his father in surprise, not expecting to see him so chipper. Meanwhile, Hayato and Tan's father sit laughing merrily like old friends, and Tan perplexedly calls out to his father. Thane asks suspiciously if they've been fighting, but is amazed to note that he hasn't seen him this happy in a long time. Thane's father, pleased with the result, sends his son off to cook dinner, promising to have a drink with him later. With a smirk, he admits defeat, but Hayato respectfully remarks that he was also good in battle. Tana's father looks at Hayato intently and notices that he was clearly holding back during their fight. Intrigued, he asks if Hayato was in the sharp knife squad, but he calmly replies that he was not. The man then suggests that he might have been at sharp sword, but again gets a negative answer. Tana's father is shocked. After all, this squad was made up of elites, and hardly realizes how high Hayato's level is. Hayato grudgingly admits that he's only been with them for a few months, and Tan exclaims in shock that it's unbelievable. Hayato smiles slyly and admits that he has served in even higher units, but he fears this will come as a shock to his interlocutor. He changes the subject and says seriously that Tan told him about the conflict with the Huang family, urging him not to waste his life. Tan's father tiredly replies that he tried everything he could, but couldn't change anything, so he gave up long ago. Hayato squints slyly and suggests joining forces, since he too has a score to settle with the wands. The man staggers up and asks if Hayato has a plan, to which the man confidently replies that he does. Hayato explains that brute force won't help, we need to find evidence of the Wan family's crimes to destroy them for good. Tang's father, encouraged, eagerly takes this on, promising to expose all of Huang Hongda's dirty deeds. Tan watches in bewilderment as his father and Hayato laugh animatedly, having already made their decision. Later, under the cover of night, Hayato sits quietly at the bus stop, gazing pensively into the distance. He cautiously hides behind a black car, clearly tracking someone or preparing for the next step of the plan. Hayato observes with a sneer that Mr. Zhang seems to be following him, since they meet too often. Zhang briefly orders him to get into the car, giving him no time to object. Hayato, smiling, jokes that the rich man shouldn't see his student so often or else the paparazzi might mistake him for his illegitimate son. Zhang explains that she wants to hire him as a bodyguard for her daughter during her birthday party. He adds that he's found the culprits of the past attack, but is proceeding cautiously for now, and Hayato is the only one fit for the job. Zhang calmly hands Hayato the envelope of money, assuring him that she's not going to waste his time. Hayato, looking at the money, enthusiastically calculates that there's at least 10,000 yuan in there, and jokingly calls Zhang generous. Zhang indifferently tells him to get out of the car and find his way on his own as he has other things to do. Hayato shrugs, but satisfied with the amount, mentally happy that he'll now be able to pay a few months' rent. Tall buildings sparkle with lights in the night, making it seem like the city never sleeps while Hayato is immersed in thought. Hayato opens the door and freezes, surprised at what he sees before him. He asks admiringly if Ms. June is in a cosplay, but she irritably corrects him that it's a hanfu. Hayato notices that she's making traditional tea and asks to try it with a smile, but June doesn't allow it. She coldly replies that she didn't offer him a drink, but Hayato slyly points to the second tea set. Slightly embarrassed, June stares at the cups in silence while Hayato calls her sly with a smirk. Hayato takes a sip with a satisfied smile and notes that the tea is indeed of high quality. Then, frowning slightly, he remarks that the water temperature is wrong, and insinuates that Ms. June is just pretending to be an expert. June erupts with rage, calling him insolent, but he only shrugs and offers not to drink if he doesn't like it. Hayato laughs, noticing that she doesn't look like an ice queen at all, but more like an angry girl. June admits with a heavy sigh that tea is just a hobby, but everyone around her says she has no talent. Hayato says with a smile that you don't need talent to make good tea, and the most important thing is to experience the process. He pours June tea, explaining that the most important thing in this case can be summed up in one word: heart. June takes the cup, but she feels like she's heard those words before, though she can't remember where. After tasting the drink, she admiringly remarks that the taste is deep and refreshing, recognizing that Hayato is doing a great job. Hayato modestly replies that he's not a master, but tea is all about purity, harmony, and respect, while June seems to lack only peace. June suddenly freezes as if struck by something as she gazes into Hayato's face. She notices that his gaze is too penetrating for a normal student, as if he sees through people. Hayato calmly replies that he's not going to pry, says goodnight, and heads for the exit. But before he can leave, June calls out to him, clearly hesitating before saying something important. She confesses that she wanted to ask for his help with one thing that needs to happen tomorrow night. Hayato squints slightly, pondering June's words as if trying to figure out their hidden meaning. June hesitates, then asks if she can do the same time tomorrow, but doesn't finish. Looking at him confused, she clarifies if he already has a girlfriend, her voice sounding unsure. Dawn is coming, the birds on the branch are chirping merrily, welcoming the start of a new day. Someone's heavy footsteps interrupt the silence, the air filled with strained breathing and a sense of hurry. Hayato breathes heavily after his run, enjoying the cool air and the moment of respite. The road spreads out in front of him, lit by soft lights, but he doesn't stop and keeps running. Suddenly, his eyes go wide with surprise, and his face reads shock. The words are going around in his head, asterisk, do you want me to be your boyfriend? And he can't believe what he's hearing. Smiling embarrassedly, Hayato replies that June must be joking, since he's only a high school student and it would be inappropriate. June hastily clarifies that he's misunderstood, she only needs a one-time cover for tomorrow night. She explains that she has to meet a guy, but doesn't want to hurt him by turning him down in person. Hayato, grinning, realizes he's just being used as a shield, but doesn't look too surprised. Suddenly, he hears cries for help, someone begging to stop the kidnappers trying to steal the child. A man with an infant in his arms pushes the attackers away in a panic, while they angrily demand to get out of the way. Desperate cries for help echo in the night silence, making Hayato wary. He raises his head sharply, his gaze becoming intense and anxiety building in his chest. Without wasting a second, he abruptly pushes himself off the ground, his body rushing forward with lightning. With incredible speed he crosses the street, leaving only a blurred silhouette behind him. In an instant, his figure soared into the air like a missile headed towards its target. Hayato lands on the ground with a mighty thud, the ground beneath his feet shuddering slightly. One observer is shocked to report that a man has just jumped across a river 10 meters wide. The elderly man opens his eyes wide in amazement, perplexed as to what has just happened. Nearby, a man with a child in his arms rushes his accomplices, shouting for them to start the car faster. Before the kidnapper can react, Hayato is in front of him, ready to strike. Hayato lands forcefully in front of his captor, causing him to wince in surprise. The intruder screams in rage, demanding that Hayato stay out of other people's business. Hayato's eyes flash with menace, his gaze becoming frighteningly hard. A knife appears in the kidnapper's hand, his fingers clenched on the hilt in indecision. An annoyed shout comes from the car, demanding that we hurry up and grab the kid. Hayato confidently dodges the stabbing blow, leaving his opponent confused. With a sharp movement, he delivers a powerful blow, sending his attacker straight into the hood of the car. A toddler who has been attempted to be kidnapped cries out in terror for help, shivering with fear. One of the perpetrators lies unconscious against a tree, unable to continue the fight. The kidnapper's car is flipped on its side, the windows are shattered, and a muffled crackling can be heard from inside. The criminal, realizing his utter helplessness, drops to his knees, trembling with fear. The people surrounding the scene are perplexed, not believing that one man did it all. The father of the rescued child says the stranger returned the baby and left immediately. An influential man is stunned by what has happened, pondering who could have wielded such power. Against the backdrop of dawn stands a figure in a red jacket, someone they feel shame in front of. The morning begins with the usual noise in the schoolyard, students gathering before class. One of them asks in surprise what Luofeng said to his father the last time they met. It turns out that after this conversation the man stopped drinking and even took up sports. Luofeng, upon hearing this, jokingly reminds him that there is a treat for such a change. During class, he catches the teacher's stern look, but only winks slyly back. The teacher casts a stern look, clearly annoyed by the student's behavior during class. Someone mentions that Ms. June studied at a prestigious university and had many admirers. Another student smirkingly asks Luofeng if he fantasizes about her since almost the whole school is in love. Evening comes and a high-rise apartment complex appears in the frame, creating the atmosphere of a nighttime city. In the room, someone suddenly throws a box and Luofeng catches it with ease. Luo Feng admires the expensive suit and inquires about its price, but only receives a demand to change. 10 minutes pass and he finally comes out, causing Ms. June to stop in surprise. She reminds him that he is now a Harvard graduate, a company owner and a millionaire. Luo Feng looked around himself, amazed at how imposing he now looked. After sitting down on the couch, he asks Ms. June with a smile to wait a bit while she changes her clothes. The girl confidently said she was ready, turned around, and the guy leaned back relaxed on the couch, sleeping peacefully. He woke up suddenly, ran his hand over his face and blinked, not immediately realizing what was happening. The girl apologized for the delay due to makeup, but added with a smile that it worked out great. On the street, the guy offered to call a cab, but the girl instantly dismissed the idea as if it were unnecessary. She asked perplexed how a millionaire could get along without a car, and he looked confused. The luxury car stopped and the man jeeringly asked how much the girl had paid to mess with the guy. The girl frowned, tiredly stating that it was time to stop this pointless conversation and just answer. The guy grinned, promising that he could even drive a tank if he wanted to, because he could. Once in the car, they slammed the doors shut and the evening light reflected on the sleek lines of the bodywork. The guy raised an eyebrow slightly and, with a dose of mockery, clarified if he should feign surprise. The girl looked at the guy seriously and asked him not to call her Ms. June anymore. He thought about it for a second and, smiling slightly, wondered what he should call her now. She calmly replied that he could call her Man as if it was a matter of course. The guy repeated her name, looked intently at the phone, and then pedaled sharply. There was a roar of the engine, the car sped off, and he grinned, wondering if he should find out more about the man they were to meet. The car raced across the bridge, overtaking other cars, and the lights of the city reflected in the water. Man nonchalantly explained that her parents had chosen her fiancé, who turned out to be a wealthy philanderer. The guy with a sly grin asked if he could buy her location for 10 million yuan. He suddenly laughed out loud, pressed the gas pedal to the floor, and accelerated even harder with a squeal of tires. The car stopped abruptly by the water. The lad got out, looked around and exclaimed delightedly, amazed at the view. The guy looked thoughtfully at the luxurious yacht and immediately realized that its owner was incredibly rich. Man gracefully took him under her arm and, smiling slightly, asked if they should go inside. The waiter was relieved to say that he had waited a long time for her arrival, but was surprised to see the attendant. Without hesitation, Man calmly replied that the man was her boyfriend, which confused everyone. The yacht lit up with bright lights, a loud horn sounded, and the evening air was filled with tense anticipation. Guy remarked thoughtfully that Situ's family was an influential dynasty, and warned Man against insulting them. They stepped confidently inside when suddenly a cheery voice called out to Man by name. The man spread his arms wide with a bright smile, enthusiastically declaring that he had been waiting for her for a very long time. He held out a lush bouquet to her, but Man replied with a polite smile that she didn't like flowers. Not to be confused, the man tossed the bouquet and assured her that he would find a prettier one, while praising her looks. A man in a brightly colored suit enthusiastically offered Man a taste of the expensive steak he had prepared. She wanted to refuse, but the guy next to her calmly remarked that she should agree out of politeness. Sighing, Man reluctantly agreed to have dinner with him, realizing there was no way to avoid it. Suddenly the man flared up when he saw her hand in the guy's palm and demanded that she let go. Man calmly introduced the guy as her boyfriend, but the groom got angry and screamed in rage. The guy lightning fast intercepted his opponent's fist, squeezing it so hard that he howled in pain. He grinned, advised caution, and threatened to leave his body at the bottom of the river. The groom asked in shock how the man knew about his brother, but only heard a mocking reply about the grocery store. Infuriated, he shouted, demanding respect for Situ's family, but was only met with a confident look from his opponent. The guy threw in with a smirk that he was obviously spoiled, to which the groom roared with rage and shouted an insult. A harsh voice advised Minji to show more respect, adding that his brother had saved his life. Man gave a surprised gasp as she recognized her grandfather in the speaker, and immediately tensed with surprise. The boy remained silent, his gaze remained cold, but something incomprehensible flashed in his eyes. The elderly man explained that he had heard about the meeting and decided to come to see his granddaughter. He calmly looked at Minji, who looked confused, and asked how he was doing. Meng was surprised to ask her grandfather when he arrived in Jiangnan and wondered if he knew the man. The older man smiled enigmatically and explained that there was much more than familiarity that bound them together. Luo Feng said with a grim expression that he was being looked for in the wrong place. The grandfather calmly replied that his body had never been found, for the cliff was full of wild beasts. Man looked at both of them dazedly, not understanding what the conversation was about, and demanded an explanation. Luo Feng tiredly stated that he wouldn't be able to help today, and without waiting for a reply, he turned around to leave. Man anxiously called out to him, but at that moment his grandfather exclaimed that everyone was waiting for his return. Luo Feng glumly replied that he was not a god and just wanted to be an ordinary schoolboy. Just as he was about to leave, a loud voice ordered him to stop, filling the air with tension. The stern man stepped closer and reminded him that Mr. June had told him to stay put. Luo Feng coldly warned that he wasn't in the mood right now and didn't want to humiliate anyone. The guard frowned, not believing his ears, and asked in surprise at what he had just said. Enraged, he grabbed Luo Feng's shoulder, hurling an insult in his direction. At the same moment, Luo Feng abruptly twisted around and threw his opponent back with a powerful punch. The guard cried out in pain as he was elbowed in the stomach and staggered backward, trying to steady himself. The guard slammed into the wall with force, his face contorted in pain, but he was still determined. Man shouted in panic for them to stop fighting immediately, but her voice went unanswered. Luo Feng only snorted coldly, standing confidently and calmly, as if the fight didn't bother him at all. The guard rushed forward with a jerk, but in the next moment, Luo Feng lightning struck him in the side. The impact threw his opponent back. He was horrified to think how strong he was. Luo Feng calmly turned around and walked away, leaving the defeated opponent to kneel down in helplessness. The guard admitted his defeat with despair as he looked down and reported that he had failed his master. Grandfather only sighed and advised him not to blame himself. After all, the one who defeated him was no ordinary person. In the past, Luo Feng was considered China's greatest soldier, topping the elite rankings. He was now called the Demon King, but in a club full of dancing people, no one knew it. The golden liquid slowly filled the glass, splashing quietly, creating a sense of solitary, lingering silence. Luo Feng calmly raised his glass to his lips, taking a measured sip as the music rattled around. He drank slowly, ignoring the noisy club as if he were in another world. Placing the glass on the counter with a muffled clatter, he tilted his head slightly, thinking about something. His gaze remained cold and detached, his eyes reflecting fatigue and unspoken thoughts. Loud music shook the club, multicolored lights flashed everywhere, but Luo Feng remained motionless. He closed his eyes, as if trying to ward off the noise, when suddenly images of the past flashed through his mind. An explosion tore through the night darkness, fire engulfed everything around, and a wounded man lay among the flames. Somewhere in the forest, dogs barked and raced forward, their shadows flickering between the trees, blending into the night darkness. At the edge of the cliff, illuminated by the glow of the fire, two figures stood looking down into the unknown. Someone's hand abruptly grabbed the fighter's wrist, causing him to turn around with a startled expression. He looked up in shock at whoever was holding him, fear and bewilderment mixed in his eyes. A massive explosion erupted behind him, fire soared into the sky, and he reached forward in desperation. His body tilted, the ground went out from under his feet, and he realized with horror that he was falling into the abyss. At the last second, his eyes widened with panic, his heart sank, and his face contorted in a mute scream. The loud sound made Luo Feng's eyes widen, tension and concentration flashed in his gaze. He lifted the glass, taking another sip, trying to distract himself from the flood of memories. Suddenly someone swooped down on him and the liquid splashed right onto his shirt. The cold alcohol dripped down the fabric, leaving a dark stain and causing an unpleasant sticky feeling. Luo Feng slowly tilted his head, his face contorted with irritation, and anger seemed to boil over his head. Luo Feng muttered a swear word with irritation, his gaze cold and displeased. A girl stood in front of him, embarrassedly apologizing and explaining that she had accidentally bumped into him. He looked at her silently, his expression remaining impenetrable, as if he were assessing the situation. Suddenly he changed his tone, smiled broadly, and asked if there was anything she could do to help him. The girl looked around in surprise, not realizing how his reaction had changed so quickly. Luo Feng flinched as the girl suddenly jumped on top of him, causing him to look puzzled. She whispered quickly, begging him to play along and help her out of a difficult situation. At the other end of the club, an angry man with an eye patch was shouting at his subordinates, demanding an explanation. He ordered the girl to be caught immediately, warning that the consequences for him would be disastrous. One of the men nearby grinned smugly, promising her boss that she wouldn't be able to escape. Luo Feng sat relaxedly at a table as a group of people in the distance hurriedly left the club. He informed the girl with a slight sneer that the danger was over, but their posture made him slightly uneasy. The girl apologized in confusion and then smiled gratefully for helping her through a difficult situation. She briefly thanked him again before quickly turning around and hurrying away. Luo Feng passed her a glance, sighed heavily, and thought that it looked like he had just gotten lucky or had had too much to drink. The girl tried desperately to break free, shouting that she hadn't written anything down, but she wasn't being listened to. She rushed to Luo Feng, begging him to call the police, but he only silently drank his drink. An order sounded to take her away immediately, and the men stepped forward with a threatening look. The girl continued to scream, asking Luo Feng for help, but he looked indifferent. One of the thugs leaned over to him and coldly advised him to forget everything he had seen or there would be trouble. One of the bandits smugly declared that Luo Feng wouldn't dare to go against them because they were the Black Foxes. In response, Luo Feng lightning struck him in the face, sending him backwards with a deafening sound. He grabbed his opponent and slammed his head against the table several times with force, repeating the gang's name. The other criminals recoiled, looking at him anxiously while their comrade barely kept up. Luo Feng growled irritably, demanding that they no longer appear in front of him, but they stubbornly did not disappear. A man with an eye patch menacingly asked Luo Feng if he knew who owned this bar. Someone in the crowd whispered that only a madman would dare to pick a fight in One-Eyed Dragon's territory. Another man explained that it was one of the 4 leaders of the Black Foxes, along with White Shark, Red Bear, and Gore. Onlookers watched the situation with interest, assuming this guy was now in serious trouble. The One-Eyed Dragon warned that he didn't like disturbances, but would intervene if necessary, and demanded a name. Luo Feng introduced himself as Commissioner Black Kitty with a drunken smile, miming a meow and raising his hands. Some chuckled, figuring he just had too much to drink, but others suggested throwing him out of the bar. The One-Eyed Dragon calmly reminded him that the establishment was a business and fighting could scare away customers. He then pointed at the girl, saying that she had secretly videotaped something important and should hand over the tape immediately. Luo Feng squinted his eyes, pensively patted his pockets and lazily stretched out that he might have the video. The gang men confidently stated that Luo Feng was their accomplice and threateningly told him not to move. His eyes flashed with cold fury, and he glared at his opponents with a look that had not a shred of fear in it. The 2 bandits involuntarily stepped back, amazed at how fierce and intimidating he looked. Luo Feng disdainfully threw out that trash would always remain trash, no matter how much he tried to look formidable. The crowd spoke in amazement, admiring his courage, but some urged him not to anger the One-Eyed Dragon. The bandit asked Luo Feng in a trembling voice if he wanted to die, stunned by his audacity. Luo Feng grinningly admitted that he had a penchant for danger and wryly insulted his opponent. He calmly stated that he was out of beer and asked the waitress to bring more, completely ignoring the threats. The One-Eyed Dragon noticed that Luo Feng wouldn't be so confident if he didn't possess real strength. With a serious look, he proposed a game. If Luo Feng dodged one dart, he would let it go. There were whispers in the crowd, admiringly discussing the One-Eyed Dragon's secret weapon that could kill stealthily. One spectator admiringly confessed that he had not expected to witness such a spectacle, and his interlocutor agreed. The girl desperately tried to end things by offering to give up the video in exchange for Luo Feng's freedom. Luo Feng, shaking his glass, lazily clarified if he had correctly understood that it would be fair game. A tense silence hung in the club, even the music stopped, and the DJ looked around puzzled. Luo Feng smirked and promised that after the fight, his opponent would get summer teeth, some here, some there. The One-Eyed Dragon stated that Luo Feng had a chance to see his secret weapon that he had spent years of training on. He reported with cold certainty that the man was the first to challenge him publicly, and promised him a handsome death. Luo Feng carelessly raised his glass, demanding to fill it up, as if everything that was happening was just an ordinary amusement for him. Suddenly, the One-Eyed Dragon rushed forward, throwing a dart at an intimidating speed, shouting an order to dodge. Luo Feng calmly drank the drink as if he didn't notice the deadly danger looming over him. The One-Eyed Dragon revealed his secret technique, instantly throwing not 1, but 3 deadly darts. The girl screamed in shock, reminding him that he had promised to throw only 1, accusing him of cheating. The One-Eyed Dragon grinned, stating that he would not have achieved his power by remaining an honest man. The darts whistled towards Luo Feng, but he easily repelled them as if it was a simple game. Luo Feng looked at the darts in his hand in surprise, pretending to wonder if he had gotten too drunk. The crowd froze in shock as they watched him easily repel the deadly attack, leaving the One-Eyed Dragon stunned. The girl exclaimed admiringly that it was incredible, but Luo Feng only calmly offered to leave. They headed for the exit, but Dragon's men suddenly surrounded them, preventing them from taking a single step further. The One-Eyed Dragon recognized Luo Feng's strength, but firmly stated that he would not let the girl go without a record. The girl boldly stated that she was not afraid of threats, because she was protected, and threatened to report the bandits. She angrily shouted out that the One-Eyed Dragon was blinded by pride, otherwise she would have realized long ago who she was dealing with. Luo Feng calmly admitted that the latter could indeed have underestimated him with only one eye. Taking his time, he tossed the glass with a light movement of his fingers, throwing the dart with flawless accuracy. The One-Eyed Dragon screamed in pain, clutching his face, and his men rushed towards him in panic. The one-eyed dragon, squirming in pain, ordered to urgently gather all the fighters to deal with Luo Feng. A crowd of men with guns in their hands surrounded him. The tension in the air was rising. The club had turned into an arena. The enraged bandit shouted, demanding to kill Luo Feng, his voice trailing off with rage and powerlessness. The girl frightenedly begged Luo Feng to leave, saying that there were too many enemies and he had better not interfere. He only smirked as he removed his tie and calmly replied that he had been waiting for an opportunity like this for a long time. The crowd rushed to the attack. One of the bandits shouted joyfully that it was his time to show himself. Luo Feng swiftly moved forward. His movements were lightning fast and his punches were precise and powerful. The opponent with the bat tried to strike, but Luo Feng effortlessly dodged, instantly counterattacking. The bandit with the bright mohawk froze with widened eyes, realizing he was completely helpless. Luo Feng smirked, his gaze full of confidence, and the fallen bills scattered around him. Luo Feng abruptly grabbed his opponent's clothes, his gaze cold and merciless. With incredible force, he threw the bandit to the side, causing him to fly helplessly into the air. The one with a scream crashed right into his partner, their heads colliding, causing a deafening sound. Behind him, another opponent had already swung his bat, but Luo Feng, without losing his cool, turned around sharply. Grabbing his attacker's weapon, he knocked it out of his hands in a powerful motion, sending the two to the ground at once. Luo Feng easily repelled the attack, sending his opponent into the air with an apt leg kick. Another bandit furiously rushed forward with his fists, but Luo Feng dodged as if he had anticipated his move. A moment later, he grabbed his attacker by the neck, his eyes flashing with cold determination. With a thud, the bandit collapsed to the ground, and Luo Feng placed his foot on his back, preventing him from moving. The remaining enemies froze in fear as they watched their comrade fall, their faces contorted with horror. Luo Feng flew into the air, his figure shining against the dazzling light, startling everyone around him. His body rushed downward at an incredible speed, like a shooting star aimed straight at his opponents. The crowd watched the spectacle in horror, their faces expressing a mixture of fear and utter disbelief at what was happening. The one-eyed dragon shouted furiously through the pain, whether his men were demanding if Luo Feng was alive or if they had already finished him off. One of the bandits groaned nervously, unable to utter a word, his face pale with panic. The bandits realized in horror that Luo Feng had single-handedly defeated all 30 of their men, leaving behind chaos. He took a deep breath, stretched relaxed and noticed that he felt much better now. The one-eyed dragon, clutching his face in pain, admitted defeat, but warned that it wasn't over. He vehemently stated that Luo Feng had only defeated the weakest leader, and the other 3 would soon come after him. Luo Feng grinned, saying that he usually didn't forgive threats, but he was tired today, and thanked the dragon for the concession. Luo Feng calmly slipped his jacket over his shoulders and said he was going to bed as if nothing had happened. The girl called out to him, but without turning around, he stated that his name was Luo Feng and they should memorize it. One of the bandits confusedly asked the one-eyed dragon what they should do now after such a defeat. That one ordered to tell Big Boss and the rest of the leaders that the girl escaped from the video and Luo Feng is their new problem. In the dark room, lit only by the neon lights of the city, a single order sounded ominously: "We must kill him." The girl ran after Luo Feng, begging him to stop, her voice sounding insistent. He, slightly annoyed, asked why she was still following him, since she was safe now. With a smile, she introduced herself as Lin Jingshu, a trainee reporter, and said that she wanted to get to know him. Luo Feng immediately realized that her recording would reveal the gang's criminal activities, so she was being hunted down. Getting in the car, he warned her that she'd better quit her job and get out of town if she wanted to live. Luo Feng nonchalantly waved goodbye and left, leaving Lin Jingsha puzzled. The girl angrily demanded at least his contact, but getting no response, she got even angrier. The one-eyed dragon stood gloomily with his head down, his face expressing suppression and anger. Big Boss stated with a cold stare that the latter had disappointed him, and Dragon himself humbly admitted defeat. Another gang leader indignantly remarked that the Black Fox's reputation had been thrown away because of him. The masked man coldly asked what the one-eyed dragon had to say for himself. The one, pouring sweat, admitted his guilt, but excused himself by the incredible strength of his opponent. The other man mockingly remarked that reading books clearly didn't do him any good. A hooded man entered the room, and the masked man immediately addressed him. The unknown person smirked and said that Lin Jingshu was a reporter trainee and Luo Feng was a high school student. The man was surprised that even Ma Zhen couldn't defeat Luo Feng and recognized his strength. The other suggested that the ringleader allocate men to get rid of the problem guy. The hooded man mockingly recalled how the interlocutor's brother had fled after the failure. The irritated man asked sharply if the man had come to fight or if he was just chatting. The masked man firmly ordered the wild mountain tiger to take out Luo Feng quickly and cleanly. Luo Feng suddenly sneezed as if someone had just remembered him. He exhaled relaxedly, finding the whole situation quite amusing. Getting out of the car, he headed towards the building where expensive cars were waiting for him. Stopping at the door, he opened it slightly and peered inside. There was a girl sleeping serenely on the couch, unaware of his presence. Luo Feng, seeing the sleeping girl, thought that she might catch a cold and decided to cover her up. The girl slowly opened her eyes, her gaze slightly hazy from sleep. Leaning closer, he politely apologized for waking her. From her perspective, however, he looked suspicious. He smelled of alcohol and his facial expression seemed sly. Frightened, the girl screamed loudly that a pervert was in her house. Luo Feng thoughtfully looked at the girl and quietly said her name as if he was pondering something important. The girl, perplexed, asked him why he was so strong, clearly not believing the usual explanations. He replied irritably that it was all her own fault for making him come back so late. Then, wanting to end the conversation, he said he would just treat the wound and go to bed. Meanwhile, she squeezed the wet cloth, preparing to help despite their recent argument. The girl held out something in apology, regretting what had happened and her grandfather's sudden appearance. She thoughtfully noticed that Luo Feng and her grandfather looked familiar, calling him a super soldier. The guy sarcastically asked if a man like him could have let himself get hit. The girl insisted, demanding an explanation as to why he was at her school and how he knew these people. Luo Feng grinned and confirmed her grandfather's words, suggesting that she call him Superman, which only made her angrier. Luo Feng asked if the girl would believe him if he said he was an ordinary student, but she refused. She watched in silence as he rose and headed for the exit, leaving the conversation unfinished. Outside, the morning light flooded the streets and he left the building with a quick step. On the street, Luo Feng took up jogging, easily avoiding passers-by and maneuvering between the stalls. Stopping near one of the food outlets, he looked up in surprise at something ahead of him. Luo Feng stopped at a stall and ordered his breakfast, waiting for it to be prepared. A huge building loomed in the background, and he noted with admiration how wealthy the people living there were. A servant of the mansion introduced himself as Don and informed him that Luo Feng was now allowed to move freely inside. However, he immediately warned that if he approached Ms. Zheng's room, he would be in trouble. Soon, young Master Bao appeared in the mansion, and Dong greeted him respectfully. A man in an expensive suit said with a satisfied smile that Wei Wei's birthday party would be a big success. Luo Feng turned around at the call and saw a girl in an elegant dress standing attractively on the stairs. The fat man admiringly exclaimed that Wei Wei looked dazzling, and Luo Feng calmly greeted her. The girl coquettishly chided him for being too formal, suggesting that he simply call her Wei Wei. Fatty mentally cheered as he watched the scene, happy that Wei Wei seemed to be losing interest in Luo Feng. The fatty was showing off the expensive gift with a smug smile, hoping to impress Wei Wei. Luo Feng calmly held out a bag of simple street food, saying that it was his humble gift. Wei Wei smiled happily, accepting Luo Feng's treat with sincere gratitude. The servant, seeing her reaction, was shocked. She didn't even look at the fat man's gift. The scene moved to Wei Wei's window, leaving a mystery. What happens next? Wei Wei, lying on the bed, covered her face with her hand, embarrassed as she recalled eating Luo Feng's gift. She wondered if she looked silly as she ate the street food, but it tasted pretty good. In the spacious living room of the house, the fatty sat waiting while Luo Feng quietly sat across from him. The fatty introduced himself as Bao Ningxian with an important look, hoping to make an impression. Luo Feng grinned and corrected him, noting that his grandfather was not Bao Jiaozi at all. The servant respectfully explained that Bao Ningxian was among the 8 Yongqing experts and was known for his talent. Bao smugly remarked that he had heard of another pianist, but in his opinion, he wasn't as good. Luo Feng grinningly clarified whether the famous tone expert in front of him was indeed the famous tone expert, and why his nickname sounded so strange. The servant, playing along, suggested changing Bao's nickname to something more euphonious, like Master of Music. Bao frowned, puzzled as to what was even strange about his title, while the servant remained embarrassingly silent. The girl greeted the older servant with a confident smile, noting that she hadn't seen him in a while. The servant exclaimed in surprise as he recognized her and remembered that it had been almost 10 years since they had last met. He reported that Wei Wei was upstairs, and offered to tell her of the arrival of an old acquaintance. Bao watched the conversation and thought with slight bewilderment that he didn't expect Wei Wei to know such a bold girl. Suddenly, something swept through the air with a deafening whoosh, making everyone wary. The girl's foot swiftly flew forward, aiming straight for her opponent's face, causing everyone around her to be shocked. Bao froze as he felt the boot almost touch his nose and a drop of sweat ran down his forehead. She smirked and mockingly asked if he had anything to say, calling him a fatty. Luo Feng watched her movements carefully, amazed at the speed at which she attacked. The girl turned to him and asked the same question, but he only chuckled quietly, denying everything. The girl shrieked with joy when she saw her friend and admitted that she hadn't expected her to come. Ta replied with a smile that it had been 10 years since they had seen each other. A friend noticed that she had changed a lot, because she used to look much more feminine. The girl revealed that she studied boxing abroad and came back for her birthday. She then suggested going shopping, involving Luo Feng in the plan as well. The girl started the motorcycle, gripping the handlebars tightly, and prepared for a sharp start. She tore forward, taking her friend with her, the engine roaring, leaving everyone behind. In the car, one of the guys was rushing the driver, demanding to catch up with the motorcycle riders. The driver exclaimed indignantly that if he drove that fast he would drive into a ditch. Meanwhile, everyone had arrived at a large shopping center shining in the sunlight. Passers-by were discussing the girls, some admiring their style, others glaring at their companions. One of her friends remarked admiringly that the other always stood out like a princess. The group decided to move on, choosing where to head next. Luo Feng sighed, realizing that accompanying these girls was not an easy job at all. Meanwhile, the guy in the striped suit resented being forced to carry his purchases. Luo Feng hinted with a chuckle that actions were more important than expensive gifts when it came to Wei Wei. The guy in the striped suit was surprised, but quickly lit up at the thought, seeing the sense in it. Wei Wei looked thoughtful, but immediately waved it off, suggesting that everyone go for the steaks. The luxurious restaurant shone with lights, creating the perfect setting for their enjoyable evening. Around the table, the discussion took an unexpected turn when an unexpected question came up. The guy in the striped suit became indignant upon hearing the unpleasant nickname and immediately demanded an explanation. Luo Feng calmly advised him not to give in to provocation and just show his best self. Encouraged by these words, Bao said with a swagger that he was willing to buy the restaurant as a gift to Wei Wei. The girl thanked with a smile, but admitted that she didn't really eat steak that often. At a neighboring table, someone snorted derisively, calling Bao a show-off, not hiding his annoyance. The man in the suit silently lifted the lid of the dish, watching intently. Wei Wei didn't suspect anything, but Luo Feng was immediately wary upon noticing his movement. Suddenly, the plate of food flew into the air, causing everyone around to freeze in surprise. The girl with the bandage on her arm reacted instantly, throwing the knife with lightning-fast accuracy. The sharp blade stabbed into the table beside the man with a thud, causing him to frown. The loud sound of impact echoed through the restaurant, causing all the customers to turn around in surprise. The waiter apologized to the guest in a panic, explaining that he had forgotten to bring him the utensils. Luo Feng calmly continued eating, deftly using his fork as the discussion went on around him. The girl watched him carefully with a serious expression, realizing his skills. Luo Feng remarked with a slight chuckle that it was easy to make a mistake in anger and injure an innocent person. The girl opposite was staring intently at Luo Feng, clutching her instruments as if she was pondering something important. Luo Feng calmly wiped his mouth with a napkin and said that he was just an ordinary classmate of Wei Wei. However, her gaze became even sharper, and she pronounced with obvious suspicion that he was no ordinary student. Wei Wei stepped into the conversation with a smile, admiringly telling him how he had saved her from her kidnappers. Her words confused her companion, causing her to reconsider her first impression. The girl frowned slightly, but when she heard the answer, she nodded and thanked her interlocutor without too much emotion. Luo Feng calmly admitted that he was also acting as Wei Wei's bodyguard today, which caused him to be surprised. Wei Wei laughed and raised her glass, happy to note that she now had 2 nights at once. The day continued to be fun as the company went to the amusement park, enjoying a ride on the carousel. As the sun began to set, the evening took on warm hues, wrapping up a busy and carefree day. Wei Wei glowed with happiness, admitting that she had never felt so joyful before. Bubu laughed in agreement and, still flustered, said she had to leave for a while. The sign on the door clearly indicated it was a women's restroom, which is where she was headed. Inside the spacious and elegant room, several girls stood in front of mirrors, fixing their makeup. Meanwhile, someone was having a dangerous conversation on the phone, discussing the need to eliminate the target before the end of the day. The phone was closed and silently dropped into the trash can, as if an unwanted burden had been disposed of. Bubu stepped confidently toward the door, but suddenly a strange scene appeared before her. The girl screamed, accusing the guy of wandering into the women's restroom with bad intentions. Luo Feng calmly stated that as a bodyguard, he should be where his ward was. Bubu squinted, wondering if he had exposed her identity or really turned out to be a pervert. The motorcycle screeched to a halt, leaving a trail of dust on the road behind it. The silhouette swiftly drifted away, dissolving into the golden light of the sunset. Wei Wei snuggled against Bubu's back and admitted with a smile that this was a day she would not forget. Bubu stared silently ahead, her gaze through her helmet expressing something profound. Back home, Wei Wei happily greeted Uncle Dune and excitedly told him about her day. Wei Wei, smiling, said goodbye, saying she was going to change her clothes and would be back soon. Bubu asked suspiciously why this was necessary, but received no clear answer. Luo Feng watched Wei Wei, pondering how an innocent girl was caught up in a conspiracy. He looked at her joyful face, thinking that she could just enjoy life. But his gaze darkened, for today someone was plotting to ruin her happiness, and her best friend was standing next to her. Luo Feng calmly stated that it was pointless to resist, after all, she had already seen his strength. Bubu tensed, narrowing her eyes, and asked defiantly if he wanted to stop her. Her gaze flashed with determination as she added if he wanted to test her skills. Luo Feng only turned away, and her hand slowly slid to the weapon under her clothes. He grinned, assuring me that he was just kidding, because he was a good man with nothing to hide now. Bubu recoiled sharply, her eyes widening in shock as she demanded an explanation. Luo Feng smirked and said that if they paid more, he would pretend to be injured and split the reward. Bubu recoiled, calling him crazy, but he only calmly replied that the price was always negotiable. He added lazily that he could be a bodyguard if the amount suited him, and grinned. A sudden gunshot broke the silence, and Bubu immediately realized where it came from. It was Wei Wei. Bubu tensed up, her gaze darting to Luo Feng as she pondered if another assassin had appeared. Wasting no time, she abruptly pushed herself off the ground and soared upward, making an incredible leap. Her body crossed the air smoothly, she was rapidly approaching the edge of the roof, deftly clinging to the ledge. Her face contorted with strain, her muscles tensed, but she kept moving without the slightest hesitation. Luo Feng flew over with ease, and Bubu only irritatedly noted his incredible abilities. Luo Feng landed softly, his feet touching the surface with flawless precision and ease. He instantly raised his head, noticing the tense atmosphere, and worriedly asked what had happened to Wei Wei. Bubu took a step closer as well, watching Wei Wei carefully while Luo Feng clarified if she was alright. The girl laughed, cradling the cat to her chest, noting with a smile that the cat had confused her again. Luo Feng and Bubu looked at her suspiciously, clearly not expecting such a strange turn of events. Wei Wei cried out in shock, clutching the cat tightly, not believing her eyes. Bubu snorted irritably upon seeing this and exclaimed, calling the situation strange. Silence hung in the house, everyone gathered in the living room, immersed in their own thoughts. Luo Feng silently drank the drink, while Bubu watched him with her lips pressed together nervously. She reproached him for his impulsiveness, but he only calmly replied that she was like that too. Master Chiu greets Uncle Don with a slight smile, walking into the hall with a confident stride. He calmly informs me that he has booked a 5-star hotel and has the cars ready for the trip. The guest is at a loss to clarify the situation, but the man in the suit only nods silently. The bodyguard demands that everyone leave immediately, and the woman in the green dress tries to object. The young man frowns, irritated as he watches Chiu kick the guests out of someone else's house. The bodyguard sternly addresses the two seated people and demands that they leave immediately. One of them leisurely places the glass on the table and asks the reason with obvious displeasure. The guy in the sports jacket replies that he came to Wei Wei's birthday party and didn't taste the cake. The stocky man hurriedly explains to Master Chiu that this young man is just Wei Wei's classmate. Master Chiu calmly remarks that the hotel has everything he needs and he will try the cake himself. The bodyguard, not hiding his irritation, demands that the guy leave the room immediately, not allowing him to object. The boy strikes sharply, sending the guard flying, and the rumble of the blow echoes through the room. The guard realizes in horror that he can't move and can't believe he lost to the boy. Master Chiu declares that he has never lost, so he will take the cake if he is not defeated. The guy only chuckles, indifferently noting that the house isn't his and it's safe to trash everything. Master Chiu squints his eyes, intently observing the situation and assessing the situation with a cold expression. The crowd murmurs admiringly, marveling at the strength of the guy who ignores Chiu's authority and defeats the guards. The young man with his hair gathered back is alarmed, realizing that his interlocutor intentionally mentioned Mr. Zheng. Master Chiu states with a slight smile that he came to celebrate Wei Wei's birthday, not to cause a riot. The guy replies calmly, saying that he doesn't like Chiu's look, and it's up to Wei Wei herself to decide. Master Chiu confidently declares that Wei Wei will agree, for he has prepared a gift she cannot refuse. The woman in the elegant dress is curious about the gift and admits she is curious herself. Chiu smilingly wishes Wei Wei a happy birthday and she politely thanks him, maintaining a cordial atmosphere. He remarks that since Uncle Zhang also wants to see the gift, he will show it to everyone. The bodyguard holds the box with the gift, and Wei Wei watches with mild surprise. Wei Wei gazes admiringly at the gift, while the people around him are surprised to discuss the rarity of the flower from the Tian Mountains. One of the guests is amazed. The last time such a flower appeared was 10 years ago, and it is impossible to get it. Master Chiu explains that there are butterflies living at the top of the Tian Mountains, feeding on the dew from these flowers. Wei Wei is touched by his attention, but hesitates, saying she can't accept such an expensive gift. Chiu smiles softly and assures her that he is not precious to her, for she is worthy of it. Master Chiu looks at the guy in anger and demands an explanation, insinuating that he despises his gift. The stocky man mockingly informs him that the guy has prepared just soy milk and fried bread for Wei Wei. The guy calmly observes that not only is the flower useless, but it doesn't even have good taste. One of the guests laughs wryly, surprised that the rare flower turned out to be common and not worth the effort. Master Chiu clenched his fists and realized that he had been tricked into buying a useless flower for a huge amount of money. The guy smirkingly remarks that Master Chiu has really put in a lot of effort, and it's obvious to everyone. The young man with the gathered hair realizes in a rage that he is being provoked and decides to accept the challenge, putting his victory on the line. Wei Wei stares at them in surprise, clearly not expecting such a turn, and the tense atmosphere only grows. The bodyguard reminds him that he promised to protect Wei Wei all day, so he can't leave no matter what happens. The boy frowns and firmly states that he will not leave the room, despite any entreaties. A grand piano stands in the center of the room, glistening in the light as if waiting to be played. Master Chiu walks towards the instrument with a confident stride, clearly intending to demonstrate his abilities. He calmly announces that he has prepared another gift, music that he himself composed for Wei Wei. His fingers gently touch the keys and the first sound spreads through the hall, catching the attention of all the guests. Chiu begins to play with a smile, the melody smoothly filling the space while those present watch him carefully. Guests are surprised that the celebration has suddenly turned into a competition between the two men, but recognize that the music is beautiful. Wei Wei looks at Master Chiu, pondering that he is not just handsome and rich, but chosen by the family for certain reasons. Her gaze then falls on Luo Feng, and it's as if she's thinking about him, but not rushing to judgment. Wei Wei suddenly realizes as if she's making a choice, and panics and denies it, feeling embarrassed. Luo Feng watches Chiu play, realizing that although the music isn't brilliant, it reflects his talent, but is confident that he will win. Master Chiu's fingers gently bounce off the keys, completing the performance, and the hall fills with silence. The guests nod approvingly and begin to applaud, noting that the music is really good and worthy of admiration. Chiu smiles smugly and motions for his opponent to leave if he can't respond in any way. Luo Feng sits calmly with his arms crossed, clearly in no hurry to leave, while Wei Wei tensely looks at him. She whispers his name in confusion, as if expecting him to do something in response to the challenge. The man with the mustache frowns, realizing that he can't go against the Chiu family, but he also shouldn't leave Wei Wei unprotected. Luo Feng sighs quietly, then leisurely rises from the sofa, showing that he accepted the challenge. He politely states that he can't compose music, but asks permission to play Chiu's piece. Master Chiu asks incredulously if Luo Feng is really going to repeat his tune after hearing it only once. Luo Feng only smiles and calmly asks his opponent not to back down from the terms if he wins. Luo Feng calmly places his fingers on the keys, preparing to play, while those around him watch him doubtfully. Some of the guests whisper, certain that he doesn't understand the music and only pretends to know what he's doing. Master Chiu stares at him in shock, unable to believe that Luo Feng can actually replicate his work. He is shocked to realize that his opponent is playing his tune backwards, turning it into something new. The sound of the keys fills the hall, the notes form a meaningful harmony, and everyone begins to realize that something incredible is happening. Luo Feng plays confidently and the melody sounds crisp, impressing everyone with its accuracy and unusualness. Wei Wei looks at him admiringly, realizing that he is not only talented, but also completely unpredictable. Master Chiu restrains his irritation, but admits defeat and abruptly tells his men to leave. The man with the mustache is concerned. Luo Feng won, but it could offend the Chiu family, which will lead to consequences. Suddenly the lights go out in the room, the chandelier cracks, and someone asks in bewilderment what's going on. Luo Feng and the young man with gathered hair cast tense glances at each other as if waiting for the next move. Wei Wei gazes in admiration at the approaching birthday cake, lit by candles that shimmer in the darkness. Suddenly, a melodious voice is heard in the silence, humming a familiar birthday song. Luo Feng continues to sing with a slight smile, and his confident look shows that he is in complete command of the situation. The guests pick up the song, happily congratulating Wei Wei, wishing her happiness, health and all the best. Wei Wei is radiant with joy, sincerely thanking all the guests and enjoying the warm atmosphere of the party. Those around her cheer her on, offering to make a wish and blow out the candles on the beautiful cake. A man with gathered hair sits on the couch, watching with a grim, focused expression. He stands up slowly, his gaze fixed on Wei Wei, and something ominous hangs in the tense silence. A knife is clutched tightly in his hand, gleaming in the dim light while Wei Wei suspects nothing. The intruder approaches Wei Wei silently, clutching a knife as she makes a wish with her eyes closed. Suddenly there is a clang of metal. Someone's blade instantly blocks the path of the attacker's weapon. Wei Wei opens his eyes and is startled to see the man in front of him, who has already drawn his knife to strike. A man in a suit stands nearby, holding a gun, and the atmosphere instantly grows hot. Luo Feng looks at the intruder with rage, mentally demanding an explanation as to why he is disrupting the plan. The intruder is furious as he realizes he has been betrayed and clenches his teeth trying to figure out what to do next. Luo Feng firmly states that Wei Wei is his friend, and he won't let anyone hurt her. The enraged attacker rushes in screaming, intending to take out the one he considers a traitor. At this moment, Luo Feng's fingers suddenly pressed on the keys of the piano, a sharp and loud sound was heard. He intercepts the blow with lightning speed, his weapon crossing with his opponent's blade, a blinding light erupting. Luo Feng challenges his opponent, urging him to follow him if he has the courage. They rush down the corridor, weapons glinting in the air and tension reaching its limit. Luo Feng stops at the door, noticing that it's a quiet place where no one can disturb them. The intruder smirks, anticipating a fight, and declares with burning eyes that it's time to deal. Suddenly, there was a whoosh of air being split, and a deadly blow rushed straight towards Luo Feng. Luo Feng reacts instantly, intercepting his opponent's attack, and their weapons collide with a loud clang. The intruder abruptly yanks out his blade, but Luo Feng deftly dodges, preventing the enemy from striking next. Suddenly, the attacker makes a powerful lunge and Luo Feng is hit hard in the side, but he doesn't give up. With a smile, he declares that the opponent nicknamed 98 will not be able to defeat him. Somewhere in the distance the music fades, as if to end this tense and dangerous fight. The guests admiringly praise Luo Feng for his acting, and he thanks them for their attention with a slight smile. Everyone reminds Wei Wei that it's time to make a wish and blow out the candles on the birthday cake. She suddenly notices that her pet Bubu is missing, and anxiously begins to search for him with her eyes. Lo Feng offers to help, suggesting that Bubu might be hiding upstairs, and sets out to find him. Meanwhile, one of the guests raises his glass, encouraging everyone to continue the fun and enjoy the evening. Someone's hand gripped the knife tightly, the blade glinting in the reflected light as if preparing to strike. Luo Feng looks at his opponent with a sneer, stating that the difference in rank proves his superiority. The attacker swings furiously, but Luo Feng deftly evades the attack, answering with a powerful counterpunch. The enemy flies backward, his legs colliding with the force, causing sharp pain and loss of balance. He gritted his teeth as he realized that his legs were going numb and was amazed at how great Luo Feng's strength was. Luo Feng mockingly declares that his opponent will never be up to the task, confidently keeping the situation under control. Suddenly the enemy rushes forward and their bodies collide with force, causing both of them to stagger. The attacker shouts with rage, outraged that Luo Feng dared to hit him right in the face. They grapple again, their weapons crossing in the air, and the tension of the battle reaches a fever pitch. A loud voice booms out from somewhere nearby, interrupting the fight and forcing both of them to pay attention. A loud cry of "Stop!" causes the attacker to freeze, his eyes widening in surprise. Luo Feng stands quietly in the doorway and reminds him that Wei Wei is waiting to blow out the candles with Bubu. The enemy stares at him in shock, not understanding how he was able to appear completely silent. Luo Feng indifferently admits his mistake, but immediately goes on the offensive, demanding an explanation. The attacker sighs, acknowledging that he was at first willing to complete the task, but now he is regretting it. The attacker declares with a feral smile that Wei Wei has betrayed them, she is useless and must be eliminated. Luo Feng looks at him with a cold chuckle and calmly says a short, "Really?" Suddenly, the blade cleaves the air, a whistling sound is heard, and the enemy rushes to attack. The weapon pierces the body, a scarlet drop falls to the floor, and a tense silence fills the room. The attacker looks at Luo Feng in shock, unable to believe that he was trapped. The man with gathered hair looks with a cold gaze and says Luo Feng shouldn't have shown up here today. Another figure realizes in shock that the 86th ranked assassin has been defeated by him. Suddenly a command to freeze is heard all around, and the armed men demand to raise their hands and not move. The attacker reluctantly raises her hands, and Luo Feng notices someone familiar among the people. The other man looks at him with a stern expression and mentally admits that he didn't expect to meet Luo Feng here. A man in uniform menacingly announces that he is arresting Luo Feng on suspicion of murder and demands that he surrender immediately. The other person raises their hand, urging them to stop, and asks for an opportunity to explain the situation. He realizes that Luo Feng managed to kill the assassin, and it can't just be a coincidence. A man in a strict suit declares that this is a misunderstanding, because Luo Feng is his daughter's bodyguard. But the officer insists that even a bodyguard can be a criminal, so all the suspects are taken in for questioning. The man in the austere suit raises his eyebrows in surprise, clearly not expecting what he heard and losing the thread of the conversation. Luo Feng stares unhappily at the scene, clearly annoyed at the way events are unfolding. He calmly states that he saved Wei Wei and can't be the killer, and advises him to call Peng Wei before arresting him. The officer interjects with disbelief, and then remarks with a smirk that he wants to test how reasonable his subordinates are. The enraged guard shouts, accusing Luo Feng of resisting arrest, and gives the order to load his weapon. Suddenly, a loud voice comes from the doorway ordering them to immediately lower their weapons, drawing the attention of everyone present. One of the officers throws his head up in shock and shouts out in astonishment, "Boss!" Another guard suggests that Captain Peng take Luo Feng for questioning first, as the case is too complicated. Peng Wei grudgingly warns Luo Feng not to get him into trouble, but the latter only calmly thanks him. An officer interrogates a man named Junhua, asking if he knows Zhou's killer, but the man confidently replies that he doesn't. The officer reports that Zhou's killer, a British citizen, is wanted by 7 countries and is ranked 46th in the world's killer rankings. Junhua interjects with surprise and then confirms that this person is indeed very dangerous. It goes on to explain that Ms. Van was first kidnapped and then attacked by a hitman doing someone else's bidding. The boss is furious and gives his subordinates only 7 days to find the killer's client, not accepting excuses. The woman with gathered hair watches the scene and wonders in bewilderment how Luo Feng managed to get out again. The woman with gathered hair looks at Luo Feng incredulously and is amazed at how he dispatched the assassin so easily. Luo Feng replies with a smile that he is just an ordinary student, further annoying her. She decides to leave for a while, questioning her boss's motives, but leaves Wei Wei under his protection. Before she leaves, she warns menacingly that if anything happens to Wei Wei, he will not be well. Luo Feng says goodbye with a chuckle. Meanwhile, in the office of Yongcheng News Agency, someone is preparing for new events. An enraged girl bursts into the editor's office and loudly demands an explanation of what is going on. The man with glasses calmly raises his head and asks curiously what exactly she means. The girl throws the newspaper on the table and is indignant that it doesn't contain a word about Black Fox's crimes. She recalls that the editor promised to post the news, but the headline turned out to be completely different. Slamming her palm down hard on the table, she demands an immediate explanation as to why the information was withheld. The editor calmly opens his desk drawer, says thoughtfully that he remembers everything, and pulls out an envelope. He hands the girl her first month's salary, adding 3 more months as compensation. He then informs her that the president thinks she is unfit to work at the newspaper and wants her to leave. The girl looks at him in surprise, but then coldly demands the data stick back. The editor advises her to think carefully before her next step, for she is encouraged to forget unnecessary things. The editor holds out the money to the girl with a smile, assuring her that it will be better for both of them. But instead of taking them, she throws the bills back with disdain, refusing the bribe. She firmly declares that she would never do such a low thing and turns away from him. With her head held proudly high, she walks out of the office, leaving the editor in an annoyed state. Meanwhile, the shot shifts to the orphanage building where the girl seems to be heading. The girl leans sadly on the railing, thinking about the fact that she has no money to buy clothes for her younger siblings. She reflects that their house isn't even air-conditioned and fears it will be especially cold in the winter. Cheerful voices echoed from afar, someone clapping her hands, calling her to join in the festivities. But she resolutely clenches her fists and vows to ensure her family has a warm and happy winter. Meanwhile, elsewhere, people are raising their glasses, loudly proclaiming a toast and savoring the moment. At the table during dinner, one of the guests thanks Luo Feng for his help with the events of the day before. The woman invites him with a smile to make himself at home and treat himself to everything on the table. Luo Feng calmly replies that he has returned from the country of M, answering a question about his past. One of the attendees curiously asks if he has a family, but immediately apologizes for her curiosity. Luo Feng says with a slight smile that his family is just himself, leaving the guests pensive. The girl wonderfully interjects if Luo Feng has really always been alone. The other woman sympathetically apologizes, but he calmly replies that he's used to it. In his thoughts, Luo Feng admits that he had another relative, but that one only brought nightmares. The head of the family notes his fighting skills and offers to continue protecting Wei Wei, but Luo Feng refuses. Although he needs the money, he firmly decides not to get involved in such conflicts anymore. The head of the family seriously asks Luo Feng to protect Wei Wei for another month for $10,000 a day. Luo Feng is amazed by the amount and instantly changes his attitude, enthusiastically repeating the sentence. The head adds that he will do him a favor if he agrees to help. He also promises support if needed, hinting at possible problems with Zhang Tihong. Luo Feng, after thinking it over, agrees, but puts a condition: protection for 1 month only.